Hey there, welcome to the channel. So this probably doesn't look too appetizing, does it? It's leftover chicken. More precisely, it's a leftover chicken carcass. Today on the channel, I have one more use for this before I get rid of it. I'm going to show you guys how to make an easy gluten-free chicken stock using the leftover bones from this chicken. Now, whether we roast the chicken like this one or we grab a rotisserie chicken at the store, we always make it into chicken stock. Chicken stock, not a super hard recipe, everyone has one, but I'm also gonna show you the easiest way that I found to strain out all the other stuff so we just get back to this stock. I'm Jamie with SavorySaver. I share gluten-free recipes, tips, tricks, and resources to make your gluten-free lifestyle easier. So please consider hitting subscribe and let's make some gluten-free chicken stock. For this gluten-free chicken stock, I actually use my Instant Pot. It, one, gives me a reason to pull it out and use it. Two, I don't have to watch it, and it only takes a couple hours of cook time once it gets to pressure. So I find it's the easiest way to do it. I find it's almost the cleanest way to do it because I just throw it all in there and I have to strain it anyway. So I like that it's all contained in here. So if you have a pressure cooker or an Instant Pot, certainly do it this way. If you don't, by all means, still make it, throw everything in a stock pot and just simmer it for 3 or 4 hours and see how it works for you. Use this recipe as a guide and change it how you'd like. All right, so to the Instant Pot insert. I take my chicken carcass and that's how easy that was. This is a little bigger because we actually roasted our own chicken. If you're getting one of those smaller 2 to 3 pound rotisserie chickens, 1 or 2, and honestly, when I've done it with one, I just put a little less water in it just because I'm not gonna get as much flavor out of one as I am 2. So I always use 1 to 2 chicken carcasses. And then I just kind of go with what I have in the fridge or what I have in the, in the cabinets. I do 1 or 2 onions, depending on the size. And I do cut them up some, just in big chunks. I've got to strain it anyway. It's not saving any time. And I feel that it just distributes the flavor better. Just me, it may not do anything, but that's what I do. I take a couple ribs of celery, washed of course, and then I do the same thing. I break it up, throw it in there. Couple carrots, I rinse them really well, leave the skins on, and they go. Seriously, if I could cut the onion that way, I would do it. I do like using garlic in mine, so I will use 2 or 3 cloves of fresh, but since I have this minced stuff, I'm just gonna throw it in with a little bit of liquid. Everything for this is to taste. It's what you like. So if you don't like something, leave it out. If you want more of something, add extra. Got 1 large rosemary sprig. Use dried if you don't have fresh. I've got a couple bay leaves. One's pretty small. These are fresh from my bay leaf tree, so I'm gonna use 2. And I always use dried if I don't have fresh available. I'm gonna add some parsley, so I've got a couple big sprigs of that. Again, stems and all. I've got dried thyme here. My fresh thyme doesn't look great, so I'm gonna use dried, about a teaspoon or so for me. I've got some peppercorns here. Sometimes I use ground, but I have peppercorns, so I usually will throw a few in. There's what, probably 15 or 20 peppercorns in there. I throw a few of those in whole. The final thing we're gonna add is salt. And unless you're watching your salt intake, you need to add it. I've got about a tablespoon there, a little more. I can add more later, but I like to add about that much, especially when I'm doing a full pot, because I want the broth to have flavor, not only from the vegetables, but also, the salt helps enhance all those. So that's all I'm adding to this other than the water. If I have mushrooms, you could add mushrooms. You could add anything you want to this vegetable-wise. Now, my Instant Pot has a max, so I'm gonna fill it up to the max. 9 times out of 10 do that. The only time I don't is if I have a small chicken carcass from a rotisserie chicken, and then I don't use as many vegetables either lots of times, and I'll cut it back a little bit. But for this one, I'm gonna do a full pot. Okay, so in goes the water. All All right, so I'm just below the max line here. My veggies are a little bit above, but that's all gonna cook down, so I'm not worried about that. Make sure your seal is on there. So I'm actually gonna put my lid on before I even plug it in, just because it's easier to move and hopefully I won't spill it. So let's move you over so you guys can see how I set this up. So the Instant Pot is off right now, but plugged in. So I don't use anything fancy, none of the fancy buttons. I don't use it for broth. I turn it to manual. I set it to 120, which obviously that was the last time I used the Instant Pot, was when I made broth. 120, so 2 hours, and then I let it start on its own. It's now starting to heat. It's gonna take, half hour or so probably to even heat up, depending on that temperature of everything. And it's full. So once it heats up, I'll let it cook for 120 minutes. Once the timer goes off, I typically turn it off. I don't leave it on warm, I let it start cooling off. And sometimes I let it cool for 20 or 30 minutes because it releases the pressure slowly instead of me releasing it with the lever. Because it's so full, we don't want it splattering all over the kitchen. So I usually let it cool for a little bit in here. After that, it needs to be strained. And as far as I'm concerned, that's the most tedious part of this recipe. And I have finally gotten it where it really isn't that bad anymore. So I'm gonna show you that once this is done. So now that our chicken stock is done, of course, the tedious part is to drain it. So I'm gonna go over what I do to get it to drain as fast as possible and to get the process done. And then I'll just show you a little bit of footage of it draining because obviously you don't need to watch 15 minutes of that. So what I like to do is once I open the Instant Pot, I use a spider because it has all these holes in it so I can pull out all the solids. I move all the solids to a great big bowl and then I can get rid of the entire thing all at once. Then I get another large bowl and a great big strainer. And this is very, very old school. Like, this strainer is probably as old as I am. I mean, I think it was my mom's and I ended up with it somehow. But it has some decent sized holes in it instead of a fine mesh. And I've got it lined with a coffee filter. This is a commercial sized coffee filter, so it's bigger than what you would typically find at home. I find these work better for me and they're not super expensive and I don't have to use cheesecloth. So I've got some of these. It usually takes me 2 to 3 depending on how much broth. Eventually the coffee filter will just get so saturated with the stuff that doesn't filter through that you have to swap out filters. But they're only a few cents a piece, so it's super easy to just get rid of it. After it's all strained, I put it in these and then move it to the freezer once it's completely cooled. I usually do 32-ounce containers because then it takes me a couple of these to make a big batch of soup. Today is actually Halloween when I'm filming this. Yesterday here in North Carolina, we were in the low 80s. Today we are currently sitting at 46 degrees and rain. So we're having chicken soup tonight. So I'm not even gonna worry about filling these up and putting it in the freezer because I'm using it tonight for dinner. Let's get this strained. Here's what the broth looks like as it's straining. I just keep adding to it as it drains. And here it is once it's drained. I've already started getting stuff out for chicken soup. So here's our chicken broth that we made with our leftover chicken. Took the carcass, threw it in with some veggies and some aromatics, and there you go. That's just a couple cups of it. I usually get about anywhere from 4 to 6 cups of chicken broth once it's all strained. Guys, look how dark that is. I want to interrupt myself for just a minute because I want to show you what this broth slash stock slash bone broth does as it cools and show you how good it really is for you. So let's look at my chicken soup that I made the other night after making the broth. You see how it all slides and is congealed? I know that's not a super attractive term for it. That's all the gelatin that we pulled out of those chicken bones, and that's exactly what we want our broth to do as it cools. So once this heats up, it's all liquid again, but making it yourself helps to give you that kind of quality, and it doesn't really take much time at all. Now, let me finish up this video and go back to the other day. Actually, you can probably see it better this way. Guys, that's all I have for today. Please leave me any comments below. I want to thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.